The transport ship carrying Ambassador Taman Park and his small team moved slowly toward the massive space station. Park looked out the window at Harmony's edge, a giant metal structure floating in the darkness. The station was bigger than any human city, built by aliens who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. "Sir, we're getting close," said Captain So-Young Kim from the pilot's seat. She was a soldier, not a diplomat, but Park had asked for her to come. Something told him this meeting would not go well. "Thank you, Captain," Park replied. He adjusted his formal clothes and checked his notes one more time. Today he would speak for all of humanity. The weight of that responsibility felt heavy on his shoulders. Dr. Wu Jin Lee sat quietly in the back, reading reports on his tablet. As Earth's best expert on alien behavior, he would help Park understand what the aliens really meant when they spoke. Lee had studied 12 different alien species for 20 years. He knew their languages, their customs, and most importantly, their lies. The docking bay was enormous. Their small human ship looked like a toy next to the alien vessels already there. Park counted at least 50 ships from different species, all much larger and more advanced than anything humans had built. "Remember," Park said to his team as they prepared to leave the ship, "we are here to find a peaceful solution. No matter what they say, we must stay calm." The three humans walked through the station's halls. The gravity felt strange, and the air smelled like metal and something sweet that Park could not identify. Aliens of different shapes and sizes moved past them, some on legs, others floating, a few crawling on the walls. Most did not even look at the humans. The meeting room was at the center of the station. When the doors opened, Park saw a huge circular chamber with seats arranged in tiers. In the center sat the most important aliens in the galaxy, the leaders of the hegemony. These 12 species controlled most of the known worlds and had technology that humans could barely understand. High Executor Vorthak stood as the humans entered. He was tall and thin with silver skin that seemed to glow under the lights. His people, the Nexari, were known for their advanced computers and energy weapons. When he spoke, his voice came through a translator device. "Humans," Vorthak said, and the word sounded like an insult. "You have finally arrived." Park bowed slightly, a sign of respect he had practiced many times. "High Executor, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Earth hopes we can find a solution that benefits everyone." Several aliens made sounds that the translator did not convert to words, but Park guessed they were laughing. War Prime Zelthon, a massive creature covered in dark scales, leaned forward in his seat. His species, the Kethmori, were warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds before joining the hegemony. "Solution?" Zelthon's voice was deep and threatening. "Human, you misunderstand. We did not call you here to negotiate. We called you here to deliver our decision." Park felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his face calm. "I see. May I ask, what decision the hegemony has made?" Vorthak activated a holographic display that showed a map of known space. Human colonies appeared as small blue dots scattered across several star systems. They looked tiny compared to the vast territories, controlled by the hegemony marked in red. "Your species has expanded too quickly," Vorthak explained. "In less than 300 years you have spread to 67 worlds. You reproduce rapidly, you adapt to new environments, and you learn new technologies faster than any species we have observed." "Surely those are positive traits," Park said carefully. "Humanity could contribute much to the galactic community." "Contribute?" Zelthon stood up, his massive form casting a shadow over the human delegation. "You take resources, you change planets to suit your needs, and you ask too many questions about our technology. You are a threat that must be controlled." Dr. Lee whispered something to Park in Korean. The ambassador nodded and spoke again. "The hegemony has ruled the galaxy in peace for millennia. We have no desire to disturb that peace. What would you have us do?" Vorthak touched a control and the map changed. Most of the blue dots representing human colonies turned red. "You will surrender 70% of your colony worlds to hegemony control," Vorthak announced. "The remaining colonies will accept permanent oversight from our administrators. Your military will be reduced to local defense forces only. Your research into advanced technologies will cease. Park stared at the map. Billions of humans lived on those worlds. Families, children, entire communities that had spent generations building new homes among the stars. And if we refuse? Park asked, though he already knew the answer. Then we will take all your worlds, Zelthun said simply. Starting with Earth. Captain Kim shifted slightly behind Park, her hand moving closer to the weapon at her side. Dr. Lee continued to watch the aliens carefully, noting their expressions and body language. This seems rather extreme, Park said. Perhaps we could discuss alternatives, technology sharing agreements, trade partnerships, gradual integration into the hegemony structure. You still do not understand, interrupted another alien. This, one resembling a giant insect with multiple arms. We are not negotiating with you. We are informing you of what will happen. Forthak nodded. Your species is young and foolish. You believe you can bargain with powers beyond your comprehension. Look around you, human. Count our ships. Consider our weapons. We have destroyed species far more advanced than yours. Park looked at the alien faces surrounding him. He saw no doubt, no fear, only cold certainty. They truly believed that humanity posed a threat to their order, and they had decided to eliminate that threat. How long do we have to consider your terms? Park asked. 72 of your hours, Forthak replied. Return to your homeworld. Discuss with your leaders. But understand this, the decision has already been made. You will comply, or you will be removed. The meeting ended abruptly. The aliens simply turned away and began talking among themselves, as if the humans had already left. Park and his team walked back through the station in silence. Once they were safely aboard their ship and heading back to Earth, Captain Kim finally spoke. Sir, they're not going to change their minds. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender demand. Dr. Lee nodded in agreement. The body language was clear. They see us as insects to be stepped on. In their minds, they're being generous by offering any terms at all. Park stared out at the stars as their ship jumped to faster-than-light travel. Somewhere out there, human children were playing on worlds their families had built with their own hands. In 72 hours, those worlds might be lost forever. Send a message to Earth, Park said quietly. Tell them we need an emergency council meeting. And tell them... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Tell them to prepare for the worst. The ship disappeared into the darkness between stars, carrying news that would change everything. Behind them, on Harmony's edge, the aliens continued their discussions about the minor problem of humanity, confident that in 3 days, it would be solved forever. None of them suspected that they had just made the greatest mistake in galactic history. Deep beneath the Swiss mountains, in a chamber that few humans knew existed, the most powerful people on Earth gathered around a circular table. President Hyejin Choi sat at the head, her face showing the strain of the past 18 hours since Ambassador Park's message had arrived. The holographic display in the center of the room showed the same map the aliens had presented. Human colonies scattered like drops of water in an ocean of alien territory. Admiral Dong-Wook Yoon pointed at various systems as he spoke. Our intelligence estimates are clear, Admiral Yoon said, his voice heavy with the weight of bad news. The hegemony has over 2 million combat vessels. We have fewer than 8,000. Their smallest patrol ships carry weapons that could destroy our largest battleships. A single hegemony dreadnought could probably glass an entire planet. General Sang Ho Kang slammed his fist on the table. So we just give up, hand over our colonies and accept slavery? It's not slavery, said Counselor Won-Sik Lee, the representative from the outer colonies. It's managed extinction. They'll control our population, our technology, our future. In 2 generations, there won't be anything left that we'd recognize as human. President Choi rubbed her temples. She had not slept since the message arrived, and the weight of deciding humanity's fate was crushing. What about our defensive capabilities? Our fleet? Admiral Yoon shook his head. Madam President, I've run every simulation possible. If we fought a conventional war, we might last 6 months, maybe 8 if we're lucky and they underestimate us. But the result would be the same. Then we accept their terms, said Foreign Minister Jae-hyun Kim. Better to survive as a reduced species than to die as a proud one. That's not survival, General Kang shot back. That's slow death. At least if we fight, we die as humans. The argument continued for hours. Some council members favored acceptance, others preferred hopeless resistance. But President Choi noticed that Director Mi Rae-jung had remained silent throughout the debate. The head of Terran intelligence sat quietly, occasionally making notes on her tablet. Director Jung, President Choi said, interrupting an argument about evacuation procedures. You haven't spoken. What does intelligence recommend? Jung looked up from her tablet. She was a small woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. For 15 years, she had run Earth spy networks, gathering information from across the galaxy. Madam President, before I answer that, I need to ask you something. If I told you there was a third option, one that the hegemony doesn't know about, would you be interested? The room fell silent. Admiral Yoon leaned forward. What kind of third option? Jung activated her own holographic display. Instead of star maps, it showed communication intercepts, surveillance footage, and technical analysis reports. For the past 20 years, we've been monitoring hegemony communications, Jung explained. We know their languages, their codes, their military procedures. More importantly, we know how they think. She touched a control, and the display showed alien ships moving through space in precise formations. They fight like they've always fought. Massive fleets, overwhelming firepower, direct assault. It's worked for them for thousands of years against species that fight the same way. What's your point? General Kang asked. My point is that they've never fought humans before. They don't understand how we think, how we adapt, how we innovate when we're desperate. President Choi felt a spark of hope. Are you saying we have hidden advantages? I'm saying we have hidden projects, Jung replied. Dr. Yoon Ji-seo, would you please join us? A door opened that no one had noticed before. A woman in a white lab coat entered, carrying a briefcase that looked like it could survive a nuclear explosion. Dr. Seo was young for someone in such a high position, but her reputation as a genius was known throughout the scientific community. Dr. SEO, President Choi said, I wasn't aware you were on the base. I've been here for 6 hours, Madam President, ever since Director Young called me. Dr. Seo set her briefcase on the table and entered a long code to open it. What I'm about to show you is classified beyond top secret. Only 12 people in the government know these projects exist. She pulled out several data tablets and activated them. The holographic display changed to show technical diagrams that looked like nothing anyone in the room had seen before. For the past 8 years, we've been working on 3 projects, Dr. Seo explained. Project Mirror, Project Ghost, and Project Hammer. Each one represents a completely different approach to space warfare. Admiral Yoon studied the diagrams. I don't recognize any of these technologies. Because they're not based on current technology, Dr. Seo said. We started with the assumption that we would eventually face enemies with superior conventional weapons. So we developed unconventional solutions. She pointed to the first set of diagrams. Project Mirror involves quantum manipulation on a scale never attempted before. Instead of trying to build better armor or shields, we found a way to make matter phase shift between dimensions. You mean like science fiction? General Kang asked. I mean like science fact. We have working prototypes. The room erupted in surprised voices. President Choi raised her hand for silence. Dr. Seo, are you telling me we have weapons that can compete with the hegemony? Madam President, I'm telling you we have weapons that the hegemony can't even understand, let alone counter. But they're not ready for mass production. Director I. Jung leaned forward. How long would you need? For full deployment? 6 months minimum. But for a demonstration? Dr. Seo smiled for the first time since entering the room. 2 weeks. The council members looked at each other with new expressions. The hopelessness was gone, replaced by something much more dangerous. Possibility. What would you need? President. Choi asked. Complete military cooperation, unlimited resources, and most importantly, time. We need to make the hegemony think we're preparing to surrender while we actually prepare for war. Admiral Yoon understood immediately. We accept their terms publicly, but drag out the negotiations while you finish the projects. Exactly. Ambassador Park is very good at talking. Give him something to talk about. President Choi stood up and walked to the star map. She looked at all those human worlds, all those families who were counting on her to protect them. Director, Young, in your professional opinion, do we have a real chance? Young's answer was immediate. Madam President, the hegemony has made the same mistake that powerful empires always make. They've become comfortable. They've forgotten that the most dangerous enemy is the one who has nothing left to lose. And Dr. Seo, can your projects really work? They already work, Madam President. The question is whether we can build enough of them in time. President Choi made her decision. Very well. We accept the hegemony's terms and request extended negotiations to work out the details. Ambassador Park will keep them talking for as long as possible. She turned to face the entire council. But we also activate Protocol 7. Every resource, every facility, every person who can contribute to our defense will be mobilized immediately, and nobody outside this room learns about our real plans. Admiral Yoon saluted. What should I tell the fleet commanders? Tell them to prepare for surrender preparations that will take several weeks to organize properly. They'll understand the real message. As the council members filed out to begin the greatest deception in human history, Dr. Seo packed her briefcase again. Doctor, President Choi called, do you really believe we can win? Dr. Seo paused at the door. Madam President, the hegemony expects us to fight like every other species they've conquered. But humans don't fight fair. We fight to win. The chamber emptied, leaving President Choi alone with the star map. In 72 hours, she would have to give Ambassador Park an answer. The aliens expected surrender. They were going to get something very different. Across human space, coded messages began to flow. Ships changed course toward hidden destinations. Factories switched to mysterious new production schedules. Scientists abandoned their current projects and disappeared into classified facilities. The hegemony had given humanity 3 days to decide their fate. They had no idea that humanity had already decided. They were going to write their own. Ambassador Taemin Park stood in the same meeting chamber on Harmony's edge, but this time he was not nervous. 3 weeks had passed since the hegemony's ultimatum, and he had become very good at finding new things to discuss. High Executor, Park said, consulting his tablet with practiced concern. We've identified another issue with the colony transition protocols. The farming communities on New Sol require special consideration for their crop cycles. Vorthak's silver skin seemed to glow brighter when he was annoyed, and right now it was almost blinding. Human, these delays are becoming tiresome. Your people have had sufficient time to prepare for surrender. Of course, High Executor. But surely the hegemony wants this transition to proceed smoothly. Moving 2 billion colonists is a complex operation. We wouldn't want any complications. Behind Park, Dr. Lee hid a smile. The ambassador had learned to speak the aliens' language perfectly. Not their words, but their priorities. The hegemony valued order and efficiency above all else. By framing the delays as necessary for proper organization, Park made them seem reasonable. War Prime Zelton shifted in his massive chair. Perhaps we should simply take the colonies by force and sort out the details afterward. An excellent point, Park agreed quickly. However, our intelligence suggests that some colonial governments might resist such action. Forced evacuation could lead to infrastructure damage, resource loss, and ongoing insurgency problems. Surely a negotiated transition would serve the hegemony's interests better? Vorthak consulted with his advisors in their own language. The translator remained silent during these conversations, but Dr. Lee had learned enough Nexari to understand the basics. They were growing suspicious, but hadn't yet realized the true purpose of the delays. Very well, Vorthak said finally. We will allow another week for your transition preparations, but this is the final extension. Of course, High Executor. The Earth government is most grateful for your patience. The meeting ended and Park's team returned to their ship. Once they were safely in space, Captain Kim activated the privacy screens and spoke freely. "Sir, how much longer can you keep this up?" "They're getting angry." Park allowed himself a small smile. "As long as necessary, Captain. Earth needs every day we can give them." He activated his communicator and sent a coded message. "Farming discussions continue. Harvest delayed. 1 more week." Thousands of light years away, Commander Jin Wuhan received the message while overseeing the most secret operation in human history. The hidden moon base of New Kyoto was now the center of frantic activity as ships arrived and departed every few hours. 1 more week, Han told his staff. "We need to move faster." The evacuation was proceeding exactly as planned, but not in the way the hegemony expected. Instead of preparing colonies for surrender, humanity was quietly moving their most valuable people and resources to secure locations. Scientists, engineers, military experts, and their families were being relocated to hidden bases throughout human space. At the same time, the colonies were being prepared for something very different than peaceful transition. Commander Han watched as his teams installed new defensive systems that looked like standard mining equipment. Underground bunkers were disguised as storage facilities. Weapons were hidden in places the aliens would never think to look. On the Yet research station hidden in the asteroid field of Kepler 442, Dr. Sumin Bei was having the best month of her scientific career. With unlimited funding and resources, her quantum physics team had achieved breakthroughs that should have taken decades. "The field tests are showing stable dimensional phasing," she reported to Dr. Seo via secure connection. "We can now maintain quantum tunnels for up to 47 minutes. "That's enough for the first phase," Dr. Seo replied from her own hidden laboratory. "How many ships can you equip?" 50 vessels are already modified. We'll have 200 ready by the deadline." In the Titan shipyards, engineer Kyung-Soo Lim was building humanity's response to the hegemony's overwhelming fleet advantage. The new ships bore no resemblance to traditional human designs. They were smaller, stranger, and built around technologies that the aliens had never encountered. "The hull modifications are complete," Lim reported to Admiral Yoon during their daily briefing. "The new armor doesn't just absorb energy, it redirects it back at the attacker. And the weapon systems, installed and tested. Instead of trying to penetrate their shields, we go around them." "Literally." Admiral Yoon nodded. He had spent his entire career studying conventional space warfare, but the past 3 weeks had taught him to think in completely new ways. The human fleet would be smaller than the enemy's, but it would fight by rules the hegemony had never imagined. The secret communications network buzzed with reports from across human space. Project Mirror had produced ships that could phase between dimensions. Project Ghost had developed stealth technology that made vessels invisible to alien sensors. Project Hammer had created weapons that could strike targets through quantum tunnels from impossible distances. But perhaps the most important development was happening on the hidden world of New Busan, where Director Young was coordinating the intelligence war. Her agents had infiltrated hegemony communications networks and were feeding false information back to alien commanders. "They think our military production has actually decreased during the negotiations," Young reported to President Choi during one of their encrypted conversations. "Their intelligence shows human shipyards operating at 60% capacity." "How is that possible?" President Choi asked. "Because they're watching the wrong shipyards. The facilities they know about are running normal civilian production. The military construction is happening in places they don't know exist." On Harmony's edge, the hegemony leadership was growing increasingly impatient. High Executive Vorthak called an emergency meeting of the ruling council. "The humans continue to delay," he announced to the assembled alien leaders. "Perhaps we should reconsider our generous offer and simply take what we want." Their fleet movements suggest preparation for surrender, reported the hegemony's intelligence coordinator. "Ship production has decreased and they're moving civilians away from strategic targets." War Prime Zelthon studied the intelligence reports. "These humans are cowards. They would rather run than fight." "Then we accelerate our timeline," Vorthak decided. "Send word to our fleets. In 48 hours we begin occupation of human space. If they resist, we destroy them." The message was intercepted by Director Young's agents within minutes. The final phase was beginning. Across human space, the last preparations began. Ships moved to final positions, using routes the aliens didn't know existed. Weapons systems came online in facilities that appeared to be simple research stations. Civilians completed their evacuation to secure locations, leaving behind volunteers who knew they might not survive what was coming. Ambassador Park received his final instructions. Keep the hegemony leadership on the station for the next 2 days, no matter what it took. Dr. Seo ran final tests on the quantum manipulation systems that would give humanity its edge. The technology was experimental and dangerous, but it was their only chance against an enemy with overwhelming conventional superiority. Admiral Yoon addressed his fleet commanders one last time before the battle. We are outnumbered 1,000 to 1. They have better ships, better weapons, and thousands of years of experience. They expect us to fight and die like every other species they've conquered. He paused, looking at the faces of men and women who were about to risk everything for their species' survival. They're wrong. We're not going to fight like every other species, we're going to fight like humans. And when we're done, they'll understand why that makes all the difference. The countdown had begun. In 48 hours, the galaxy would discover what happened when humanity was forced to evolve or die. The hegemony had made their choice to force that evolution. Soon, they would learn the consequences of that decision. The hegemony warfleet approached New Eden like a dark storm crossing space. 200 massive ships, each one capable of destroying a city, moved in perfect formation toward the human colony. War Prime Zelthon stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the planet grow larger on the viewing screen. No resistance, reported his tactical officer. The humans appeared to have evacuated the planet. Cowards, Zelthon muttered. They run rather than face their fate. What he saw looked like an abandoned world. The cities were empty, the orbital stations dark, the defensive platforms silent. It appeared that 2 million colonists had simply vanished, leaving behind their homes rather than fight. But Lieutenant Commander Junho Park, hidden in a cloaked observation post on New Eden's moon, saw something very different. Through his enhanced sensors, he could see the evacuation was complete, but the planet was far from defenseless. All units, this is Overwatch, he broadcast on the encrypted channel. Enemy fleet in position. Begin Phase 1. On the surface of New Eden, what looked like abandoned mining equipment suddenly came to life. The devices weren't mining tools at all, but quantum field generators that had been disguised and positioned over 3 weeks of careful preparation. The hegemony fleet never saw the attack coming. Space around New Eden suddenly twisted as dimensional. Barriers that had protected reality for billions of years were carefully opened. The massive alien ships found themselves caught in quantum fields that made their weapons useless and their shields irrelevant. What is happening? Zelthon roared as his flagship shuddered and his navigation system showed impossible readings. Before his officers could answer, humanity's response arrived. The human fleet emerged not from the direction of Earth or any known base, but from quantum tunnels that opened directly around the hegemony ships. Captain Nayoung Shin piloted the prototype vessel Indomitable through a dimensional gateway that materialized just 50 meters from Zelthon's flagship. "This is impossible," whispered the alien tactical officer. "Ships cannot travel through solid matter." But the Indomitable was no ordinary ship. Built around Dr. Seo's quantum manipulation technology, it existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions the hegemony didn't know existed. When Zelthon's weapons fired at it, the energy beams passed harmlessly through the ship's phased hull. The Indomitable returned fire with weapons that bypassed the alien shields entirely, striking the flagship's armor directly through quantum tunnels. Explosions bloomed across the massive vessel's hull as systems failed throughout the ship. "All ships concentrate fire on the human vessel," Zelthon ordered. But there wasn't just one human vessel. The entire human fleet was materializing around the hegemony formation, appearing from impossible angles and striking with weapons that ignored every defensive system the aliens possessed. Admiral Yoon commanded the battle from his flagship Defiance, watching as his crews executed tactics they had practiced in secret for weeks. The human ships moved through space like living things, phasing in and out of normal dimensions, striking from multiple vectors simultaneously. "Target the command ships first," Yoon ordered. "Cut off their coordination." The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The hegemony fleet, designed to fight conventional enemies with conventional weapons, found themselves helpless against an enemy that fought by completely different rules. Captain Shin guided the Indomitable through the alien formation, her ship dancing between dimensions as enemy fire passed harmlessly through empty space where she had been moments before. Her weapons struck with surgical precision, disabling ships rather than destroying them. "Enemy flagship is losing power," reported her tactical officer. "Their command systems are offline." On his dying ship, War Prime Zelthon watched his fleet being dismantled by an enemy he couldn't understand. The humans moved like ghosts, struck like lightning, and seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at once. "Send a message to the Hegemony Council," he gasped as emergency systems filled the bridge with smoke. "Tell them the humans. Tell them we were wrong." The Battle of New Eden lasted exactly 47 minutes. When it ended, the Hegemony's invincible fleet was either destroyed or disabled. Not a single human ship had been lost, but this was only the beginning. As news of the battle spread through Hegemony space, more human fleets emerged from quantum tunnels around every major alien world simultaneously. Admiral Yoon's strategy was devastatingly simple: appear everywhere at once with overwhelming force. On Nexus Prime, the Hegemony's capital world, High Executor Vorthak watched in horror as human ships materialized in orbit around his planet. The vessels that had seemed so small and primitive now filled his sky. Their strange weapons pointed down at his cities. "This is Admiral Dong-wook Yoon of the Terran Defense Forces," came the broadcast that reached every Hegemony world at the same time. "You wanted to see humanity's response to your ultimatum. You now have your answer." Dr. Lee, broadcasting from the fleet flagship, delivered humanity's message to the galaxy. "For thousands of years you have ruled through superior technology and overwhelming force. You believed that because you were stronger, you had the right to dictate terms to weaker species. Today you learn what happens when you threaten the children of Earth." On Harmony's edge, Ambassador Park finally dropped his diplomatic mask. The alien leaders who had dismissed humanity as weak and primitive now found themselves surrounded by human ships that had appeared without warning. "You offered us a choice," Park told the stunned Hegemony Council. "Surrender or be destroyed. We choose a third option: evolution." The quantum tunnels that brought the human fleets to their targets began carrying a different kind of cargo. Instead of weapons, they now transported humanitarian supplies and medical aid to worlds damaged. In the brief conflict, "This is what humans do," Park explained to the aliens who could barely comprehend what they were witnessing. "We don't just fight wars, we win them, and then we help rebuild what was broken." But not everyone accepted the new reality. On several worlds, Hegemony forces attempted to regroup and continue fighting. They discovered that the human fleet's advantage wasn't just technological, it was strategic. Commander Han's special operations teams had been infiltrating Hegemony worlds for weeks, gathering intelligence and preparing for exactly this moment. When alien commanders tried to organize resistance, they found their communications intercepted, their supply lines cut, and their troops facing enemies who seemed to know their every move. "How are they doing this?" demanded General Thrax, the Hegemony's supreme military commander, as his forces were systematically neutralized across a dozen worlds. The answer came from Director Young, whose intelligence networks had turned the aliens' own information systems against them. "We learned from watching you," she broadcast to Hegemony command centers. "You taught us that information is power. We simply became better students than you expected." Within 6 hours of the first attack, the Hegemony's military resistance had collapsed. Their fleets were destroyed or disabled, their communication networks were under human control, and their leaders were prisoners on their own worlds. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came when President Choi addressed the galaxy directly. "We did not want this war," she announced. We came to you in peace, seeking to join the galactic community as equals. You chose to see us as a threat to be eliminated. In doing so, you forced us to become something we never intended to be. The holographic message reached every inhabited world in known space, carried by quantum transmitters that made faster-than-light communication instantaneous. The old rules are over, President Choi continued. No longer will technological superiority grant the right to dominate others. No longer will peaceful species be forced to choose between submission and destruction. We offer you a new choice. Join us in building a galaxy based on cooperation rather than conquest. As human ships maintained their positions around every major hegemony world, alien populations began to understand that their universe had fundamentally changed. The species that had seemed weak and primitive had revealed capabilities that made the hegemony's technology look primitive by comparison. The age of human dominance had begun, but it had started with an offer of partnership rather than a demand for surrender. On distant Earth, Dr. SEO watched the reports coming in from across the galaxy. The quantum manipulation technology that had made victory possible was already being adapted for peaceful purposes. The same systems that allowed ships to phase through enemy fire could transport medical supplies instantly to disaster zones. They wanted to see what humans do when threatened, she told her research team. Now they know, we don't just survive, we transcend. 6 months after the collapse of the hegemony, President Hae-Jin Choi stood before the largest gathering of alien representatives in galactic history. The Great Assembly Hall on New Geneva Station, built in the same star system where Harmony's Edge had once floated, contained delegates from over 300 species. The hall buzzed with nervous energy as beings who had never spoken as equals prepared to discuss the future of the galaxy. Some species had been enemies for centuries, others had never met before. All of them were trying to understand their place in a universe where humanity now held ultimate power. Representatives of the galaxy, President Choi began, her voice carrying to every corner of the massive chamber through advanced translation systems. We gather today not as conquerors and conquered, but as neighbors seeking to build a better future. In the front row, Councillor Vexhai of the Zephyrian Commonwealth shifted nervously. His people had been among the first to formally ally with humanity after witnessing the fate of the hegemony. The bird-like alien had spent weeks studying human history, trying to understand what these powerful beings truly wanted. 6 months ago, President Choi continued, the hegemony forced humanity to choose between submission and extinction. They believed that strength gave them the right to dominate others. Today, we offer proof that they were wrong. Admiral Yoon sat with the human delegation, watching the alien faces in the audience. Some showed fear, others curiosity, and a few displayed the careful calculation of beings trying to find advantage in a new situation. The Admiral's fleets maintained positions throughout the galaxy, but their mission had changed from conquest to protection. The hegemony's former territories have been redistributed, President Choi announced, not to human colonies, but to the species who originally inhabited those worlds before they were conquered. The Veltar homeworld has been returned to the Veltar people. The Hixian mining colonies are once again controlled by Hixians. A murmur ran through the assembly. This was not what most species had expected from a conquering power. Throughout galactic history, victory meant taking territory and resources. Humanity was giving them back. Ambassador Park stepped forward to address specific concerns that had been raised during preliminary negotiations. Several species have asked about humanity's long-term intentions. Let me be clear, we have no interest in building an empire. We want partners, not subjects. From the hegemony section, former High Executor Vorthak listened with expressions that his translator could barely convey. His people, the Nexari, had lost their position as the galaxy's dominant species, but they had not been enslaved or destroyed. Instead, they found themselves negotiating trade agreements and research partnerships with their former enemies. The terms we offer are simple, Park continued. Respect for the sovereignty of all species, peaceful resolution of disputes, and cooperation in matters that affect the galaxy as a whole. In return, humanity offers protection, trade opportunities, and access to technologies that will benefit everyone. Dr. Lee, now serving as Earth's chief cultural advisor, had spent months studying the psychological impact of humanity's victory on different species. Some aliens struggled to accept that their technological superiority had been so completely surpassed. Others worried about humanity's true motives. A few had embraced the new order enthusiastically. The quantum communications network is now operational throughout the galaxy, announced Dr. Seo, who had become humanity's most famous scientist. Any world can communicate instantly with any other world. Medical emergencies, natural disasters, and other crises can receive immediate assistance regardless of location. This was perhaps humanity's most visible gift to the galaxy. The same quantum manipulation technology that had won the war was now being used to connect distant civilizations in ways that had never been possible before. Engineer Lim presented the next development. The dimensional transit system will begin operations next month. Travel between star systems that once took weeks will now take hours. The galaxy has effectively become much smaller. In the audience, species that had been isolated by distance and primitive technology suddenly saw possibilities they had never imagined. Trade routes that were impossible before became practical. Cultural exchange that had been limited to the most advanced civilizations was now available to everyone. But not all the news was about technology and trade. Director Jung addressed the more difficult issues that still faced the galaxy. Some former hegemony officials attempted to organize resistance movements in the months following their defeat. These efforts have been discouraged. We prefer cooperation to conflict, but we will protect peaceful species from those who still believe in rule by force. The translation was diplomatic, but everyone understood the message. Several attempts to restore the old order had been met with swift and decisive human response. The would-be rebels had simply vanished, along with their ships, their weapons, and their plans. General Kang reported on the military situation. Human defense forces now patrol former hegemony space to ensure the peace. However, we are not an occupation army. Local species are encouraged to develop their own defensive capabilities. We will provide training and equipment to any government that requests assistance in protecting their people. This was another surprise for many aliens. Conquering powers usually dismantled their enemies' military capabilities. Humanity was helping former enemies rebuild their defenses. There have been some adjustments, admitted Counselor Wansik Lee, representing the outer colonies. Species that relied on hegemony technology for basic services needed assistance during the transition. Human engineering teams have worked with local governments to ensure that power grids, transportation systems, and communication networks continue to function. The reality was that the hegemony's sudden collapse had created chaos throughout their former territory. Worlds that had depended on alien technology for centuries found themselves cut off from support networks. Humanity had stepped in to prevent mass starvation and social collapse, but the effort had required enormous resources. Captain Kim, now promoted to admiral after her role in the war, addressed security concerns. Piracy and banditry increased in some regions following the hegemony's defeat. Human patrol fleets have restored order, but we are training local security forces to take over these responsibilities. The message was clear. Humanity would maintain peace, but they preferred that local species handle their own problems. As the Idar presentations continued, the true scope of humanity's transformation of galactic society became apparent. The rigid hierarchy that had existed for millennia was being replaced by a more flexible system based on cooperation rather than domination. President Choi returned to the podium for her closing remarks. 6 months ago, the hegemony offered humanity a choice: surrender or be destroyed. Today, we offer the galaxy a different choice: join us in building a civilization based on mutual respect and shared prosperity, or remain isolated while the rest of the galaxy moves forward together. She paused, letting the translation systems catch up with her words. The decision is yours. But understand this: the age of conquest is over. No species will again be forced to choose between submission and extinction. We will see to that. The assembly erupted in discussion as delegates realized they were witnessing the birth of a new galactic order. Some species immediately requested formal alliance with humanity. Others asked for time to consult with their governments. A few demanded guarantees and concessions. But everyone understood that the fundamental balance of power had shifted permanently. As the delegates filed out to begin negotiations that would reshape galactic civilization, Counselor Vex High approached the human delegation. "President Choi," he said through his translator, "my people have a question that troubles us greatly." "Please ask it," she replied. "Why? Why offer partnership instead of demanding tribute? Why help former enemies instead of enslaving them? Why share your technology instead of keeping it as an advantage?" President Choi smiled. "Because that's what humans do, Counselor. We don't just win wars. We win the peace that follows. And we've learned that the best way to ensure our own security is to help others achieve theirs." Vex High's feathers rustled in what his people considered a sign of deep thought. "And if some species refuse your offer? If they prefer the old ways of conflict and domination?" The president's expression grew serious. "Then they will discover what the hegemony learned, that forcing humanity to evolve has consequences they cannot imagine." As the Great Assembly disbanded and representatives returned to their homeworlds, the galaxy began its transformation into something unprecedented, a civilization where the strongest species used their power to protect rather than dominate. The hegemony had tried to force humanity to choose between surrender and destruction. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. A species powerful enough to impose peace on the entire galaxy. And humanity intended to do exactly that, whether the galaxy wanted it or not. The age of human guardianship had begun.